Discussions in this show are for entertainment and educational purposes only and should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and neither SmartPro Financial nor Bridgeway Wealth are affiliated. Hey everyone, welcome to the Working Wealth Podcast. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Haley.
And today we're so excited to have you join us because we're going to be talking about what we've seen in our practice as the most common mistakes made by new retirees. And wait, there's more, how to fix them now. Because there's no point in talking about what the mistakes are if we don't know how to avoid them moving forward.
Well, that's very practical, Patrick.
I hope so.
Yeah,
that's really
I like
the
that.
goal.
That's why we're here.
We want to give you some practical advice of how to make sure your life is set up well for the future.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
Before we dive in, though, Haley,
Okay.
tell me something fun you've done recently.
Something fun I did recently, but made you go to, I guess, even though it was a Christmas gift for me.
Not in a bad way.
We went to the Stevie Nicks concert last night. She came to Bon Secours, or Long Live the Bilo Center.
To death do us part.
Yesterday. We went yesterday. Stevie Nicks. It was great. She's rocking. Still.
75, 76
75,
years old,
yep.
something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it was a very interesting experience.
Mm-hmm. What made it interesting?
Well, pretty sure someone was smoking in the seats behind us, smoking exactly what you think they were smoking at the Stevie Nicks concert.
Yeah.
And then I saw someone assault a police officer. And it was all very intriguing.
Yeah, which is interesting because I missed the assault on the police officer because I was outside trying to get a message off to our babysitter
Yes.
to check on our son.
That's right.
But I did see the girl get dragged out of the facility screaming, and that was quite abrupt.
Yeah,
I'll be
it
very
really
honest.
interrupts the concert enjoyment experience.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
pro tip, don't do that if you're at a concert.
Yeah.
Don't hit a police officer, please.
it's very interesting.
That's not a good thing.
But yeah,
So,
Stevie Nicks was wonderful.
good. Awesome. Great.
Aren't you glad I had fun?
I'm so glad you had fun.
Though he was with me.
No, it was good. It was a fun concert, good dinner, good time hanging out.
Okay, well then, what's something good? What's something you've done recently?
Ooh. I wasn't expecting that
how
question.
the tables
actually.
turn.
How the turntables. I think it's just been fun to just hang out with family and get to take a little bit of time off and relax and do things like this, which is recording good, helpful, fun content for all of our clients and future clients and people who don't realize that they're tuning in to listen to us talk about useless stuff.
You're so funny. Okay.
But anyway, back to the topic at hand, because I think this is
Yes.
really, really important. And one of the things I do want to make sure we just kind of clarify before we dive in is the main resources or evidence, we'll say, behind the content of what we're going to talk about today is really the body of proof of me working with clients for the past several years. I've worked with several hundred families so far in
Right.
various parts of their financial journey and had well over, I'm not going to exaggerate here, but well over 5,000 conversations with prospective clients, current clients, former clients even in some cases, about their financial life and been able to pull together what I see as critical things we need to be cognizant of and be thinking about proactively for our retirement planning. So where do we want to start, Haley?
Well, on this nice little computer in front of us, there's a number 1.
Start there.
Yeah, and it says not having a spending plan.
Right. Yeah. So number 1, the first and foremost, most important thing that I see as a mistake when people are going into retirement is not having a clear plan for their spending. And the reason why that's important is really multifaceted, but primarily is when we think about financial planning and how to even determine if we're ready, able, or capable to retire successfully, is we have to start with the cash flow. We have to start with understanding, well, how much money is it going to cost us to live, or how much money are we planning to spend to live and cover our needs, wants, and desires on an ongoing basis? And if we don't have that clear plan of what to allocate for or how to build the rest of our plan around that, it makes it very difficult to move forward with a specific understanding of what will work or what won't work through retirement?
Well, I feel like I'm not a financial advisor. Okay.
That's for compliance.
That's for compliance before I start talking. But sometimes it's a little bit more cut and dry, I guess, what you're bringing in when you're bringing in a paycheck. But then when you get to retirement and there is no money coming in, and then you've got maybe Social Security, or you're trying to factor, do you take it now or do you take it in 5 years? How the amount changes, or how much are you drawing down on your investments, or if you have any pensions getting money in, I guess. So it's important to start figuring out what your spending plan is, because sometimes your budget in retirement could be the answer to when you start taking Social Security, or when and how much to draw down on your investments. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, I think
Okay.
I think you're right on point actually with that is, and the place where this really comes in mostly for folks is, let's say you're planning to retire, you are in the process of retiring, or, maybe for a few years out from that transition, which is, by the way, a huge transition, not just, with your finances. It's a huge transition emotionally. It's a huge transition vocationally,
Yeah.
how you spend your time psychologically. I see a lot of people go through various shifts in their thinking or their focus on
Yeah, it's like
priorities.
me.
I have no idea where you're going with this, so please tell me exactly what you mean by
I
that.
was a woman, a career woman. Then I
Oh,
had a child,
yeah.
and then I became stay-at-home mom / also help you do things, but just not in the office as much. Right? It is a big psychological change.
Yeah, it is.
I feel you, retirees.
You can relate already at 30
Yes.
years old.
Yes.
Um, no, so just taking that is, I see this really, really come into play with folks that don't have as much what we consider to be like a guaranteed or fixed source of income in retirement, being Social Security or like a high level of Social Security, pensions, things of that nature. If we're just living off of our investment portfolio, which is so sustainable and possible if we do it well and we're disciplined and proactive about it over the long term. But if we're just living off of our investment portfolio as a large source of our income, and we don't have a clear picture of what our spending is, we have a really high risk of overspending what a safe withdrawal rate is. So there are
Okay,
certain
yeah.
aspects, and you've probably heard a bunch of different rules or ideas thrown out there for how to generate income from a portfolio. But there definitely is a safety factor there. And we think about, or when we think about this for clients, is how can we build out a sustainable income path given the long-term picture, but also navigating short-term pictures or short-term elements in the long term as we start to plan out what that looks like. Case in point, or a great example of this is, we know the spending is not a consistent thing over time. There's going to be large one-time expenses that come up.
Oh, yeah.
There's going to be emergencies that happen. More than likely, there's not going to be times where you want to reduce your spending. It's always something that it's going to be an increase in spending, be it inflation like we've had the past couple of years, or if it's just, a desire to do more fun things or have higher ticket items you're purchasing, things of that nature.
Right.
But when we think about that spending plan, we have to have kind of a core foundational or anchoring point to start with so that we can then build the rest of the plan around that and make appropriate decisions as things change to decide if, say, if you need to pull an extra $1,000 a month out of an investment account to cover extra expenses or living or things of that nature, well, does that actually impact your plan positively or negatively over time? And that's where we always start with this. And like everything we talk about or we've talked about so far is it really does all go back to cash flow, because the cash flow drives every other decision we can make around our asset management, risk mitigation, tax planning, legacy planning. Cash flow does drive everything. So for me, my experience, the number one risk I see or number one mistake I see by new retirees is not having a clear spending plan. And I should clarify with that, it's not just having a plan, it's being able to hold yourself to that plan
Yeah.
moving forward.
Well, and I think that's kind of like really laying us up into that number 2 point.
Very much so.
Yeah, which is carrying debt into retirement. Because as you're just talking, I'm sitting there thinking, yes, I mean, if you're starting to factor in all of these ways, all these different income, how are you getting it? I mean, one of the things you need to be thinking about is what's pulling on that pile of money. Do you still have car payments?
Mm.
Are you, I mean,
Do you have credit card debt?
yeah,
Do you have medical bills? Do you have
that's
a
right.
mortgage? Those kind of
Or are
things.
you trying to upgrade your home
Yeah.
or moving? Now that you're retired, are you moving to be closer to
Mm-hmm.
family? And then now you've got a 30-year mortgage. And
Yeah.
very
And it
interesting.
and it's so that's a really, really important one. And it does dovetail off dovetail off the first one very well, because most people, I'm saying most people, just from my
Yeah.
experience talking with a lot of folks, is it's very hard if you haven't built that behavior pattern early on to have a clear spending plan and maintain a budget or an allocation process over time with your money. It's very hard to start doing that when you shift with that psychological change and emotional change
Yeah.
from working and getting a relatively guaranteed paycheck on a regular basis to then living off your resources, because there's other impacts there, right? It's, well, now I see maybe in a bad market I'm pulling money out and I'm seeing my balances go down as I do it. Or in an up market, maybe it's not a really, really good up market, but it's a consistent average up market, and your balances are staying around the same while you're pulling money out. There's a lot of different factors at play here, and if we maintain having that debt in our lives or having, additional outflows that don't necessarily need to be there, that puts us at a further risk point where we're having to withdraw more money. We're having to plan for larger expenses that could come up.
Do
things
you
of that
ever
nature.
get point blank asked, like, okay, should I have a car payment in retirement? Or, I mean, do people ask you that specifically? Should I do this? Should I not do this? Or, because, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of life left when you retire. So, I mean, I can't imagine that everybody can walk into retirement or wants to walk into retirement driving the same car until they're no longer with us.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I brought that up because a lot of times people do upgrade their vehicle right before they retire or right after they retire.
Yeah, it's something
and
I would consider.
yeah, and it's very valid, right? Because it's, hey, I'm making this big transition, want a
Yeah.
safer, more reliable car, whatever the verbiage or
New
the
car, who this? Or who dis, or whatever they say
Yeah.
to kids these days.
but a lot of people that they'll do that and they think, well, hey, this will be the last car I buy. Well, maybe not. If you're retiring at 62, you might live another 25 or 30 years. Should that be
Yes,
the
I know
last
some
car you
people who've
buy?
done that recently.
What do you mean?
No, I'm just saying, like, I
Oh.
know, I know
Okay,
that
gotcha.
frame of thinking. There was
Yeah.
no, what do you mean?
Right. Okay. I didn't know if you had a scenario there to talk about.
Yes, me. I bought a car.
Well, we did. We'd upgraded your car,
We did.
but it's paid off with cash. We're good to go, and we don't have to worry about that for another 10 or 15 years,
Right.
right? But the key thing with that is, with the car situation specifically, is if you do live another 25 or 30 years, more than likely you're going to want to upgrade or have to upgrade that vehicle at some point in time before you pass away.
Right.
Right. And there could be a lot of different reasons. I've seen cars, completely stop running. I've seen just accidents happen, various things that can affect.
Yeah, and
that
right now the
need.
car is just an example of an expense we're using. It could be
Correct.
traveling or that you haven't been able to do before, or it could be you decide you want a camper to travel. Just all sorts of different forms of debt.
Yeah, and that's really where the key thing about that debt goes back to tying in with a spending plan is, we've talked before, is you have to have margin in your life to be able to absorb the unexpected, and also have margin in your life to be able to sustain or maintain your level of wealth or wealth accumulation process. And the good thing is, I've helped a lot of clients, navigate, hey, we have a little bit of debt that we're paying off in the next year and a half.
Yeah.
Once we get into retirement, well, in that case, we'll just have that conversation that says, that's great. Once we have that point where, say, that car loan is paid off or the camper loan is paid off or the credit card bills are paid off, from there, we're not going to keep generating the same amount of income. So say if we're pulling $5,000 a month out of your investments and you pay off that $400 a month car payment, well, now we're going to reduce that withdrawal
Right.
down a little bit because you don't still need that $400 a month. That $400 a month would be better staying inside your investment account to keep growing and compounding for the future.
So I just hear like there's so many things with financial planning. It's such a domino effect.
Yeah.
And it kind of seems like these are really great conversations to be having early and often.
Correct.
Because this might help someone answer the question of, when do I retire? And timing on retirement seems like, as I'm not an advisor, that like, is critical. Like 5 years or 2 years, it just depends on someone's financial situation of working could really make a huge difference. Especially if people are able to pay off a few more items before.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's very important, and to the point of
It's
kind of
something to consider for sure.
right. And for the way we started off the show today is we talked about not just the mistakes that we're seeing, but how can we fix them? How can we be proactive to ward off those mistakes or set ourselves up in a position to not endure those mistakes in the future? So the first thing would be, hey, let's have a spending plan. Let's start working on budgeting today.
Right,
Start allocating your income that's coming in an appropriate way towards the key priorities that matter to you, right? Because another piece about the debt side is, say you have $10,000 or $15,000 in credit card debt that you're carrying into retirement. Well, look around your house. Look in your garage. More than likely, statistically, the stuff that's just sitting there that's in your way that you bump your leg on or bump your knee on a regular basis, that's the stuff that is the debt on your credit card. So it goes back to even more so than just not carrying the debt. It's, well, are we accumulating that debt to start with? And that really does tie back into that spending plan. What is our actual priorities and values we want to allocate our money to, and being intentional about where we spend our money to enable a higher quality of life through experiences or through more saving or through getting to give and share more with others, things of that nature. So, which I think is probably a really good segue, since I mentioned giving and sharing with others, is number 3, which is, and this is a tough one because I get it now as a parent, but I'm also going to be very hard and critical on this.
Samuel's a freeloader. At 9 months old, Patrick gets it. He's a freeloader.
He's a freeloader. No, so I see this, and I've had this conversation with a lot of folks, late 50s, early to mid 60s, around this one piece. And we've actually separated with some clients in the past because they couldn't get this under control, and it became an issue for their long-term sustainability. And we can't control that, so we have to think of how can we do what's best for them and for our business. And this is really supporting adult children with finances in retirement. There's this really, really good book that was released, I believe it was the late 90s, called The Millionaire Next Door.
That's right.
And it's kind of a precursor to Dave Ramsey's Everyday Millionaires book, where they've done different studies on net worth millionaires in the U.S.
Right.
And the concept that was coined in the Millionaire Next Door is called EOC, which is Economic Outpatient Care, which is very much so, or very simply, if you have folks that live outside of your home, they're being outpatient,
or inside.
They might be living inside your home.
Yeah,
that's true. We call that economic outpatient care. If we're continually supplying or providing financial resources for able-bodied adults that could be providing for themselves. And where that becomes at risk is I've seen a lot of scenarios where we do have folks retire and they start on that path of a consistent, stable, really well-rounded financial plan to be successful over time, even accounting for market drops and other factors that could come into play. And then we start getting phone calls for, hey, I need $10,000 for my kids. Hey, I need $20,000 to help my kids buy a house. Hey, I need $15,000 because of this legal issue, whatever it may be. And that becomes a drain on your resources, which further reduces your ability to maintain a safe, healthy, sustainable retirement.
And of course, this is a hard topic to talk about.
It is, but I think the hard conversations are necessary, especially in today's day and age, right? Because people don't want to talk about hard things, but hard things matter. And if we can, I hope no one's offended by this, but if this does offend you, maybe that means you should take a look inside and figure out, why does it offend me, right? Because we care about making sure people have a sustainable path and plan. And if we're not telling the truth about it or being transparent about it, then we're not actually providing the good help we should.
Yeah, I mean, we know the difference between a situation where someone cannot provide for themselves due to medical reasons or a number of things. But we're specifically talking about when there is an adult who is a child to you, is able to work and is just maybe just not somehow getting it right. At some point,
we got to cut that financial umbilical cord is
the
what
bleeding.
it is. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Cut
and
off the bleeding.
we'll move past that for now.
Correct.
Feel free to send me your commentary. I'll be happy to respond to it.
Right.
But that is a really, really big one we're seeing, especially with the generation, because of the burden of student loan debt and rising costs of home ownership. We definitely see that. And we feel that too as like the lower end of the millennial generation.
Yes.
Things are harder, or they feel harder to a lot of folks. And we had a lot of promises made to us when we were growing up around go to school, get a good job, get a good degree. You'll never have to worry about your income or whatever. That was a big lie we were told growing up, and especially the generation right above us. So we get it. There's a ton of pressure there, but I also want to be ruthlessly honest about this, that we have to approach it in a healthy way to ensure our own future is going to be successful and sustainable.
Right.
So,
well, one thing also I think, kind of moving on with the next thing is talking about how does someone's investments or how they are invested change when they make that transition from into retirement.
Yeah. So that being said, I'll kind of lead into that with a scenario I've heard a few times over the past few years.
Okay, cool.
Is I've had people reach out to me saying, "Hey, I want to retire. What do I do? Do I just take my money out of my 401k and put it in the bank?" That is the wrong answer. Let me just clarify.
It's a good question.
Really fast. And I'm not giving this as advice for everyone, but that is more than likely the wrong answer for you, right? So we have to understand that as we invest our money, the way we invest can and likely will change to provide long-term sustainability over time. So if we're in the growth mode, we're in that accumulation phase we talked about before, we should be, or more than likely should be, investing in higher risk growth assets, things that have more opportunity for increasing in value and paying more earnings to keep increasing into more assets. As we shift from that accumulation to more of the optimization phase, we're starting to dial things in for retirement. This is a perfect example. We might be adjusting those allocations away from as much growth assets, still keeping some growth assets inside our portfolio, but also incorporating more conservative things.
Yeah, because we need this to last.
Because we need it to last, right? And that's not saying that even the conservative assets will fully protect you from everything. I think 2022 is a great example of how the bond market is not impervious to declines, due to interest rate increases. But the key thing is we have to be diligent to be proactive in understanding how we are invested and what kind of risks we're taking on, and then adjust the risk allocation to, what our lifestyle need is going to be or our planned income is going to be once we get into retirement. So a common way we do this with clients is we set up actually different buckets of assets where we'll have, we need to make sure we have a 6 to 12 month emergency fund, preferably sitting in cash in a bank, high yield savings account, things of that nature. And then we'll divide up the other assets into a more conservative or moderate conservative allocation. That just means, say it's a risk scale of 1 to 5, that's the 1 and 2 tick on there, where it's focused more on preservation and generating current income, and the rest of the assets will be kind of a longer term growth. So that second bucket is what we call like the now money, right? Like that's the money we're using to generate what we need today. And then the other money, the higher growth stuff, not being super aggressive with it, but just being higher on that scale, is going to be what we call later money, right? So like we don't want to touch that money for the next 7 to 10 years, right? But we do have our next 5 to 7 years allocated for us to pull income out of and support our needs over time.
Yep. So it's not all the same thing. It's not all in one bucket. You've got it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you can do it in one bucket, but for me, the way I've seen with experience is if we divide it up into different actual accounts or buckets, that helps people visually understand the difference of what the purpose of the money is.
Okay.
So, but the key thing is you can't, or it might not be prudent, we'll say, to stay in a high growth, aggressive portfolio forever. Unless, of course, you're 20 years old and you have $100 million, then do whatever you want to do, kind of thing. Little tongue in cheek there, but that is, I think, also a good carryover into option or mistake number 5 here, which is not having a diversified mix of retirement savings. So this might sound like I'm saying the same thing, but I'm talking instead of the actual investment types we're in, be it stocks, bonds, cash, things of that nature, thinking more about the tax status of those assets. And this is actually the one thing that led me...
This is where you lose me.
Okay. All right. We'll talk about that in just a second. What I mean
Just,
by tax status is when we think about investing in investment accounts, you have accounts that you can have tax advantages to, where you
Okay.
either get a tax deduction today and you pay taxes on what you pull out in the future.
right.
That's called tax deferred,
Okay.
pre-tax, or traditional.
Got it.
And then you have another kind that's called Roth.
Right.
And the Roth is I don't get a tax deduction today for putting money in, but whatever it grows to, if I pull out in a qualified manner,
Right.
is 100% tax free.
I understand that.
Right. There's a third kind, which is
Oh.
not a qualified account. It's called non-qualified. This would be your brokerage accounts, bridge accounts, plain Jane investment accounts. They go by a lot of different names that people call them.
Oh, cool. I've never heard them called
The-
anything.
But the key thing, we have one, by the way. But
Oh.
the key thing is these accounts, you don't get any tax advantages, but when you pull growth out in the future, you could be taxed at a lower rate in capital gains tax terms
Okay.
instead of just ordinary income. So what I mean by mistake number 5 of not having a diversified mix of retirement savings
Okay.
is a common thread that I see. And this is actually the impetus for
Are
me
you
doing
s-
this episode.
No, keep talking and then I'll butt in later. Don't worry.
Okay. So this is really the reason I wanted to record this specific episode is a lot of folks that are retiring today have 100% of their retirement savings inside of pre-tax or traditional retirement vehicles, meaning they got a tax deduction for making contributions to those accounts in the past, but as they draw dollars out, every single dollar you take out, you're paying Uncle Sam first before you can actually live off of it.
Okay.
And that's a risk, right? Because say we do have an income plan, set up, and we're pulling out $4,000 or $5,000 a month out of a $1.5 million portfolio, should be relatively sustainable. But then we have an emergency come up where we need $40,000 for a vehicle replacement.
I was going to say that's a
Or
big
we
emergency.
need it is right, or maybe it's not an emergency. We want to take a $20,000 trip and treat the family and go travel, things of that nature. That becomes a challenge where you've got to pay Uncle Sam first. And Uncle Sam, he might be everyone's rich uncle, but he's not very giving, right? So that's where I say we want to have a diversified mix of assets, meaning we have traditional, those pre-tax assets. If you're contributing to a 401k or employer plan, under current law until recently, your employer match could only be pre-tax. But most people are set up automatically with pre-tax contributions for themselves as well. But we want to have a mix of that plus Roth, plus if we have the margin and cash flow as we're building, maybe some of those brokerage assets give us
Okay.
more freedom. And that's also where in that retirement planning trajectory or kind of that life cycle from the time someone reaches age 55 until they reach age 73 today, that's that sweet spot where we can do a lot of planning that if you don't have a lot of pre-tax or you only
I
have
was
pre-tax,
just about to ask you about
we can
this.
start doing things like Roth conversions. We can do things
over time so that you don't get hit so much in 1 year.
Correct.
Because then it would be a tax.
taxable
nightmare.
event. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's other things to consider too. And part of the reason why having only pre-tax is not necessarily the best is we don't just have to worry about our federal income taxes and state income taxes if we live in a state that has state income taxes. We have to worry about the IRMA charge or IRMA surcharges, which is basically an additional add-on cost for your Medicare Part B and Part D insurance coverage if you make too much money. So as you start living off of pre-tax assets in retirement, I love your face. As you start living
If you're
off
not
of those
watching
assets,
the YouTube video, you're missing out on me
That's
going,
true.
wait, what?
yeah, definitely check us out on YouTube, subscribe, follow, do all those things, right? But if you're not being diligent about this and you only have pre-tax assets,
Okay.
right? And let's say you're drawing Social Security and you have a pension and you're taking money out of your IRAs, you have to be cautious of these thresholds where you're going to have to pay more for your regular Medicare premiums if you have
you
too
make
much
too much
taxable
money.
income. Correct. Yeah. And then additionally to that is
Boo.
we have something called required minimum distributions, which under current law start at age 73. By the time we get there, it'll be age 75. That's already in law.
Okay.
But that's where any of those pre-tax assets, you have to start drawing out a certain percentage of your portfolio based on a IRS life expectancy table
Okay.
each year once you turn age 73 to
Because-
draw down that money.
So they get their money.
Yeah. That's exactly right, because this is pre-tax accounts.
I always get worried saying stuff like that as you see my staccato-ness of that.
Right.
Yeah, because
But that's exactly right.
Because if you just were to leave it in there the whole time,
Correct.
they wouldn't be getting their money.
Right, because the government has allowed us to defer paying taxes on the growth of those
Now
assets
they're
for
like,
years.
hey,
Now they want to make sure they get the money.
Let me have my piece of the pie.
Right.
Of course.
And I think
Okay.
we've said this before on the show is in no way, shape, or form is the existence of tax deferred accounts the reason we don't have a balanced budget in the government.
Right,
That is not the
yeah.
reason. But we have had a generational shift where money keeps getting passed down generation after generation without taxes being paid on that growth. And just one final note on that is a lot of the reason why we had so many legislative changes in 2019 and 2022 with
Okay.
Secure Act and Secure 2.0 Act to change the way your retirement assets pass down. And this is another reason if you want to leave a positive legacy for your family, having all pre-tax assets actually becomes a penalty for your beneficiaries that will receive those assets. So we have to be cognizant of that too,
I was
because
curious about that.
yeah. So the key thing there is for most people that receive pre-tax assets, if you're a non-spouse beneficiary,
Like a child.
like a child,
Okay.
grandchild, friend, if you don't have children, things of that nature, the person who receives those assets will have to withdraw that money within a 10-year period of
good.
time and pay
Okay.
the taxes on those accounts.
See, I learned things by being around. I think it's
Yeah.
a 10-year.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
But the key thing there too is like the Roth accounts, they don't have that requirement. There's still a 10-year window, but it
Nice.
passes down tax-free.
Oh, nice.
Brokerage accounts, you actually get a step up in basis, which means let's say you put in 10,000, it becomes 100,000. Your beneficiary receives that with a value and a tax base of 100,000. So they don't have to pay taxes on the gain of 90,000 if they receive that when you pass away. We could spend a lot of time digging into the details. We're not going to do that for right now. But let's jump over to number 6, right? Which
Okay.
I would say is probably the one that, from my experience, is actually more prevalent on retirees' minds. But again, in my personal and professional opinion, is less critical than the one about adult children and the way your assets are mixed up.
Yeah. So number 6 is not planning for health care and medical expenses.
Right.
And as we've been talking, I've been looking at this list, and I'm just like, yeah, but like, how does one begin to do that?
Right. And it's one of those things that is a
How do you know? You
Yeah.
don't.
And I think that's probably a good point to just take a pause and pivot briefly
Yeah.
and say, whenever we talk about retirement planning or financial planning in general, we have to understand that we're never looking for accuracy, right? Accuracy would be we know exactly what the end result's going to be, and it's going to be there. We can build the perfect system and the perfect mousetrap to get us to that exact endpoint 100% without fail. We're looking for more precision. Precision is more the grouping of my results to say, am I in the ballpark?
Okay.
Because we can't control what the market's going to do. We can't control what Congress is going to do. We can't control what other governments are going to do. All that we can do is control how we choose to allocate our resources on a daily, monthly, yearly basis going into the future. So when we think about that, we have to understand that with all the best softwares out there, and there's some great financial planning softwares, I spend way too much money per year on financial planning software that I don't fully utilize. And this is the very reason why, is no matter how good your tool is, you have to have a good operator and you have to have good assumptions. And that's where I think, honestly, my engineering background of constant problem solving with changing variables comes really, really well into this scenario of financial planning, because I understand that the assumptions are going to change on a daily basis. Who saw that inflation was going to jump to almost 9% in the past 2 years? Now, by the way, it is down. So stop saying it's 9%. It's not. It feels like that, but it's not, right? But the key thing is we have to understand the financial planning or retirement planning process is a constantly iterative process, working with professionals who understand your situation and also understand the changing variables to help you get a different perspective and move towards positive behavioral change to get you closer and closer to that desired result. Understanding we might not ever actually hit that final result, but we can continue to modify and adjust our perspective and adjust what those priorities are as life changes to get us to a point of success. Great example of that is I have several clients I work with that told me 3 years ago they were ready to retire in 6 months. And then right when we were about to pull the trigger, they got a job change. And now they're as happy as they can be and they're content. And they say, hey, I'm going to keep working here till it's not fun anymore. Or I'm going to keep working here till I get this other goal or priority accomplished.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep working here till I get my health to a point that I want it to be. And that's a really good thing, right? Because it's not saying it's a zero-sum game of I've put this line in the sand that I have to move forward on. Instead, it's how can I keep myself as agile as possible as a human, understanding that I can directly impact where I go next with that.
Okay.
And bringing that back to the healthcare and medical expense piece.
Right.
So if you're an American citizen, right, and in some cases not, you can get Medicare coverage. Everyone's basically gets Medicare, Part A, and then Part B, Part D. That's for 99% of people. That's part of your long-term healthcare plan. Where we see healthcare and medical expenses come up as a key issue is if we're retiring before age 65, because age 65 is kind of that benchmark age where you can apply for Medicare and start taking that coverage to cover the majority of your healthcare expenses.
Okay.
And I see this a lot. I'm actually working with some health insurance brokers now to try to figure out how can we quote out and get more accurate numbers or more precise numbers, we'll say, to help people model what that need is going to be to cover healthcare expenses. But for most people, if you retire, say, at 60 or 61 or 62 years old and you have
Okay.
a few years before you reach Medicare, the options are pretty few. It's either you go to the health insurance exchange, the government-based organization or government-based website to find an Obamacare plan, which those are income-based. I'm going to come back to that in a second. You can do some kind of health sharing program like MediShare, Christian Healthcare Ministries,
Okay.
Samaritan's Ministries, things like that. Or you can do maybe COBRA coverage through your last employer if you had health insurance,
Right.
which is not always the worst option, honestly. Depending on your income, that might actually be the cheaper option, paying $1,800 a month instead of something through the exchange. Or we just self-insure, which is we don't have any insurance and we just hope and pray that nothing bad happens, right? That's not my preferred option from experience. I've seen some crazy things happen. But thinking about that is really the key there is we need to be working proactively to understand what are those costs potentially going to be and make a decision on the best options before we pull that
Do you
trigger.
feel like most people who are saying like I want to retire at 60 or I want to retire at 55 have any idea or have even remotely thought about what they're going to do for health care expenses if that other stuff doesn't kick in until 65?
It is a common question that we cover. It's a common thing that comes up
Okay.
as like, hey, I want to retire, but I just don't know how much health insurance is going to cost. And that's why I'm working with some brokers to say, well, hey, we
Yeah.
can help with that. Like, let's figure that out and get some real numbers that we can add back into, number one, the spending plan to better determine how we need to allocate your assets, number 4, right? To make sure we have the best plan moving forward.
Okay.
And I made a point that a lot of those plans are income-based earlier. The reason that's relevant, and it connects back to number 5, again, the diversified mix of retirement savings, is if you only have pre-tax assets and your expectation is to live off $100,000 a year, plus you have Social Security, or say $100,000 in withdrawals plus Social Security, well, you might be pricing yourself out of any kind of tax credits to cover your health insurance premiums until you reach age 65.
Okay.
So these things are all connected, right? And I hope that's been clear. Like in every episode we do, is
Yeah.
we talk about how
This is a
being
lot.
proactive and intentional is important, right? And it is a lot, but that's where working with a professional, you work with us, work with someone else, it doesn't matter who, but working with a competent professional to understand the different pieces at play, keyword being competent, to make sure we have the best plan and best proactive strategies in place to make the best decisions.
Okay.
Yeah. With that, number 7, this is another one that comes up a lot is, when do we claim Social Security or what's the right time to claim
that
Social
was kind of
Security?
what we were talking about earlier about having the spending plan, figuring out so you know how much money's coming in.
Right.
Because the longer you wait to take Social Security, right, the benefit changes.
Yes. Yeah. So Social Security benefits are actually based off of your highest 34 years of reported earnings to the government or to the Social Security Administration, which becomes an issue if, like, say you retire at 50, you don't have 34 years, you're stacking zeros into your averages, and that will bring your numbers down.
Are
So don't
you?
forget about that.
Interesting. I did not know this.
Correct. Most people don't know that. So we have to be cognizant of those kind of things with early retirement too. But thinking about that as, most scenarios or most simulations you run, 98% of the time, it's going to say that if you wait until you're age 70, which is the longest you can wait to claim Social Security, you're going to get your maximum benefits possible. Because once you reach your full retirement age, which today is like 66 and 6 months, it'll be 67 for most people moving forward in the matter of the next year or so. Once you reach your full retirement age, each year you defer claiming benefits. After that, you get an 8% bump in what your benefit would be, plus whatever the cost of living increase is, which is like an inflation-based increase on your benefits.
Okay.
But the reality is, like, if every scenario says waiting till 70 makes the most sense, you have to understand what the assumptions are there. You're assuming on how long you're going to live. You're assuming on how long your spouse is going to live if you're married. You're assuming on how long your ex-spouse is going to live if you were divorced and you're claiming off an ex-spouse's benefits. You're assuming that, or you're making assumptions based off of your other income sources. So we have to be very diligent around that to determine what is actually best for you. And a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times, the answer for the clients we work with is, hey, you're retiring at 61. It might make more sense to claim right at 62 for one of you guys and then defer the other one so we can have a smaller impact on your portfolio in the long term by taking a higher impact on it in the short term.
Okay.
And again, that's where understanding all the variables and realizing that retirement planning is not plug everything into your Empower Retirement planner through your 401k plan or your Vanguard red, green, yellow thing online with your employer. It really does come into understanding more specifics about the different pieces at play to make the best or potentially best decisions that are ultimately the most important decisions for your long-term success.
Just sitting here and talking with you makes me think there's a lot of things at play, right? When we're considering retiring. And I wonder if people really give it the time it needs.
And we're just getting started. And I say that kind of in jest, but you're very right. There's a lot of things, and we haven't even talked about withdrawal plans, the way you take money out of accounts. We're not going to talk about that, right? But I think that what you said there is a very good realization. There's so many things, and this will be kind of a nod to our next episode of how do you choose the right advisor to work with. Or the next one we're going to record, I don't know when we'll release it, but making sure you're working with someone who understands and has a clear understanding of competency of how to navigate this successfully.
Yeah.
So, but let's take that and let's jump into number 8 because we've been going for a while here.
Right.
And number 8 of the most common mistakes that we see made by new retirees is avoiding important estate planning decisions.
Give me an example.
A very important one is, and I think I've referenced this before, is not having updated beneficiaries on file.
Yes.
Right? That $1 million mistake I saw a prospect have, that his entire 401k was going to go to a first wife when he was on his third marriage. We've got to make sure beneficiaries are updated.
Yeah.
90% of estate planning can be done without an attorney. And I'm saying that, my attorney friends, please call me out on that if you want to. But what I mean by that is just proper beneficiary arrangements and proper allocations of titling of assets, like joint ownership on bank accounts, joint ownership on your house, maybe a joint ownership on a vehicle, things of that nature, or having payable on death designations on accounts, things of that nature are extremely important and critical to ensure your assets can, number one, bypass probate, which can reduce your cost for distributing an estate, and also make it more efficient where your family or designated beneficiaries can access those assets.
Yeah, especially if it's a spouse situation.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I'll also add on that is, part of that estate planning process when you do work with a lawyer is obviously the last will and testament is one of your key documents, which determines anything that's not passing through other arrangements, how that gets dispersed. If you're setting up a testamentary trust as part of your will for kids, a trust that gets established upon death. But we need to make sure we have powers of attorney living wills, healthcare directives, those kind of things, which all come into play to make sure that your personal wishes are honored
Right.
at the right time. And the reason why I say this is a common mistake I see is folks say, oh, I've had a will. We got it after our last child was born or after our first child was born. We have 5 kids now, and we haven't looked at it. And the thing that I think is important to emphasize here is, yes, there's a lot of things in life that vary between importance and urgency. This might not seem like an urgent matter until it is an urgent matter. So if you were to invest $500 to $1,000 with an attorney to get an updated set of documents, that can really have an important impact on a $2 million decision at the time of your passing. So it's very important, but it doesn't feel urgent until it is. And I've seen that in a lot of cases where folks have not gotten that POA, the power of attorney, set up, and then they have a medical condition or medical scenario that leaves them incapacitated, and no one can make legal decisions on their behalf. That's a problem. So we want to make sure we get these things set up. And there's a lot of online programs out there. We can post some of those. We'll verify with compliance, so we can post links. But there's a lot of tools out there these days that are coming into the estate planning space to even remove the direct work with like a local attorney. I have different opinions on that depending on the situation. But the most important piece is just making sure we have that set up. And that could also include, prepaying for a burial or preparing for a funeral. I have a lot of clients doing that right now, because those costs do go up as well over time. But those are the key things is, not having a spending plan, carrying debt into retirement, supporting adult children, keeping all your investments the same and not reallocating when you retire or as you lead up to retirement. Not having a mix of different types of taxable assets going into retirement, not strategizing your health care appropriately, claiming Social Security at the wrong time, and then avoiding important estate planning discussions. Those are really, really important things. And I know this is more of a meaty topic we're talking about here.
For sure.
But I think it's also important, and I hope can evoke some urgency in some people to be thinking critically about this and move to action to be proactive with their own personal plan.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank y'all so much. As always, we enjoy doing this. We enjoy sometimes wading through the difficult topics. So, but we will see y'all next time.
Yeah. Have a great day. Thanks. Discussions in this show are for entertainment and educational purposes only and should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and neither SmartPro Financial nor Bridgeway Wealth are affiliated.